Afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. I know a couple of people were already here a moment ago, but we have returned, and now we should be here in Unity Workshop Part 3. How are we doing this afternoon? So 8 minutes and 26 seconds. That's a damn good time on that last crossword. How did the other two crosswords go? They were excellent, were they? Any pangrams? Any special links to them? Some questionable content in the second crossword. Oh dear, no pangrams are. Oh well, it happens sometimes. So welcome to Unity Workshop Part 3. If you have not caught up with what's going on, then you should be able to go to there, where takes you straight to the Unity Workshop channel that we've been talking in over on my Discord. And there's some information there, including a week 3 download for this Unity project. So, if you're not familiar with what we've been trying to implement here at the moment, it's sort of Panel Quiz Attack 25, a Japanese game show that has 4 competitors, the blue, green, white and red competitors, and they all try to take control of the panel, the 25 panels you see before you. And the one with the most control at the end of the game then goes on to the final question to possibly win some prizes. Where are the rotating blades? Not that kind of Japanese game show, Shim. Not that kind of Japanese game show. Actually, a proper quiz show rather than a Sasuke or a Takeshi's Castle variant. So this is where we got up to so far, where we actually got it so that we can, if I go into the game view and just go into play mode, then we can click on the podium to take control of the game. We can then start clicking on some of the panels to fill them in and start changing their colours appropriate to the panel we selected. We can also reset the podium in control, and if we try and click on any of the panels when we're not in control of any podium, then nothing happens. And you can see the score is updating as we continue doing this as well. It works out the correct score based off of the number of panels in that particular colour. And if we go into the attack chance and we reset one of the panels, then it goes into yellow, which means it's been attacked, and it changes back into open control for everyone. Hello, Whiskers. That was a very rapid ascension to the desk. Are you okay? You okay, Whiskers? Meow. So, this is where we got up to, and I also, at the end of that stream, I left a bit of homework for you as well. And the homework was to see if you can get it to make different noises based off of the different podiums in control, because in the Panel Quiz Attack 25, each podium has its own buzzing sound. And when they then take control of some of the squares or some of the panels in the panel 25, it will also use the same sound of their buzzing sound, as it were. And there's also a separate sound for the attack chance. So, if I just actually start and restart this thing, and if I just temporarily stop Pretzel from its music, then we should be able to hear what's going on. So, this is hopefully what you should have been able to achieve if you did do the homework. If you didn't, then you can catch up with the week 3 download, and it does have the homework solved in at least a way I would have done it. So if I select dog and a long name here, then it makes that sound that we're familiar with from previous, and I got lazy, and all the other sounds are basically exactly the same except pitch shifted in Audacity. So we've got dog and long name here is that one, Mrs. Yakka is another tone up, Whiskers is another tone up again, and Box is another tone up from that, but they are distinct sounds. No, I can't quite make that that melody. But yeah, they each have their own sound like that, and if you select one of the panels, then it uses the correct sound based off of whoever is in control. just like that. And Attack Chance also has its own sound, which is just a thud. So, yeah, all that top note, I know. So, the way I did this is, originally, each of these panels did have a audio source on them, because that was the only thing that was making a sound originally. I actually removed the audio source because the sound that it was going to use was dependent on the podium. So it made more sense to have the podiums make the sound instead. So if we have a look at what I actually did in the code or in the project, let's have a look at one of the podiums. So on one of the podiums, well, all of them, in fact, but we'll look at one of them just for as an example. I added an audio source to it, and onto that we have the ding dong sound. And each one has their own variant on that sound. So you've got ding dong 2, ding dong 3, and ding dong 4. And what I did on its button on click is I added another event, and the other event is just make that audio source play its sound. So each podium has its own audio source, its own sound, and each one has a button. And alongside doing the select in the game podium, I also had it play the audio source. So each one has its own sound. The other part I added then was into the game code, because something needs to know how to play the right sound when a panel changes color. And as we implemented it in the last episode, the game is the one that has the full control over that. So in the game code, if we have a look inside the code itself, so this is the bit where there's actually a bit of code involved. We go back into the game code, which, as we said, controls the entire game structure and how selecting and deselecting of podiums works. And we have a look at select panel. This was the method we introduced that basically did all the work for us in selecting the panel based off of whatever our selected podium is. So, the key part for making it play the correct sound for the podium is that one line there. So, selected podium is the podium we have selected. Audio source. This, if I right click it, a little shortcut with Visual Studio people, if you right click on some field or some property or method or anything, you can right click and go to definition, and that jumps you in the code directly to where it is in the code base. So I added this field to podium to store a reference to the audio source so that it could be referenced in other locations in the code. So public audio source, and I referenced that in the Unity editor. So if I just jump back again, select podium, .audio source, so that is the audio source of that podium, and I'm just saying .play, so play that sound. So play the sound of the current podium, and that does the correct job of playing the right sound, whoever is currently in control. And the only other thing on top of that is that we have the attack chance play a different sound as well. So there is a audio source on the game object here for attack chance audio source. Nice and explicit in what it does. So I have that also referenced on the Unity side of things. And in this block here, because we know that this is the special block that only executes if attack chance is active, because it's in this if condition. So just as a quick reminder, everything in this set of braces here will happen if condition this holds true, and this being attack chance active, this gets set to true when we press the attack chance button in the Unity side of things. So if that is active, then it sets the correct panel background color to the attack chance color, but it also does this one line where it plays the audio source for the attack chance and plays it, and you play the splat sound. So that is that's all the homework there, and for doing the implementation. I imagine a couple of people will probably have left the audio sources on the panels themselves, and you can change the clip on the panels themselves. So just to give you an example, because it's an audio source here, you can go audio source dot clip. Clip there is the actual audio clip that it would play with. And you can assign that to whatever you want. So that could be an audio clip property or a field or something like that. And you can change that before you hit play, and it will play with a different sound each time. So that's a different route that some people may have gone with, where they kept those audio sources on the panels themselves. But I decided, because it's the podiums making the sounds, it made sense for the podiums themselves to have the audio sources, the audio playback sound elements on them, rather than the panels. Hope that all makes sense. Anybody have any questions on that little bit before we move on to the next stuff that we want to do for this one, for week 3? Anyone have any extra things? I actually do want to show off of something that someone had taken this project and actually taken it to a nice design, must say. Pop Ramen Comedy, he did this wonderful design with it. So taking the work that we've done so far and styled it with the background of one of the sets of Panel Quiz Attack, and also changed the fonts here and here to use the right font as well. Very nicely well styled. So nice work with that. Taking the work we've done and putting the extra flares on it to make it look more like the actual game itself. Very well done. I don't know if Pop Ramen Comedy did the audio homework as well, but with what I have mentioned, I'm sure he can do that right now. He's dropping a link to his assets in the Discord if you want to make yours a bit more akin to that, rather than this sort of in space variant. Just download your week 3 files and nothing in your hierarchy. There should be, Quizzy Dan. What you'll need to do is go to the scenes folder in the assets, and there should be a sample scene. This is the scene we've actually been working in. It's not exactly well named, but you should be able to go to sample scene, double click that, and then you should have everything open up then, and you'll see stuff appear in the hierarchy. Because in Unity you can have, this is something I have not mentioned yet, Unity can have multiple scenes. So you can actually have different parts of the game come up at different times, and then you can sort of load in new scenes and unload old scenes as you go through. By default, when you start a new project, it opens up with sample scene. But if you're starting afresh with a new project, more often than not, it will open up with a test scene or a blank scene rather than any particular scene. So you always have to try and find the scene that you should be working with. In this case, it is sample scene. It always generates a sample scene in a new project. So more likely than not, that is the scene you'll be working with. But mileage may vary. There may be renaming of scenes and that. This will be useful for things with very different rounds, I think. Yes, Dan, absolutely. So if there are different rounds that have completely different layouts, then you can have it change from scene to scene. Now they can share objects and share context in that. That gets a little harder. So if you're trying to share the same score across multiple scenes, that does get a little harder, and you start having to do a little more work in the code. But it is doable. It is very doable. And it is also possible to do have multiple scenes loaded at the same time. So in theory, you could have the podiums just in one scene, and then you can have other parts of the game in a second scene that's loaded on top of everything in an additive style. That's a bit more complicated and a bit more advanced, but if you're interested in that kind of thing, I do urge you to research it and see if that works for you. We may go into some scene switching later on, probably not in this particular episode, but maybe in a future episode we can do some scene switching. Should we get a VS solution with this? By default, it doesn't generate one until you open up one of the CS files. So if you go to a CS file like game and you open that up, then it will generate the Visual Studio projects and solution at that time if it hasn't done so already. So I tend not to share those solutions and projects because they are auto-generated by Unity. So whenever I share them, I just delete them because they're not necessary. Unity can generate it all perfectly from that. So don't worry if you don't see that, because when you open up one of the script files for the first time in Visual Studio, it should generate them for you. Okay, anything else? I don't think anyone else has anything else to say. So The first thing we're going to look at this time is we're going to revisit the animations that I very quickly looked at the end of the first episode. I just sort of very quickly introduced it at that point, saying, yes, there's animation, here's an example, bye. So we're going to go a little more into that and just sort of solidify animations as a concept, so that it's a useful thing. So what we're actually going to do, first of all, I think is going to have the podiums flash. So when the podium gets in control of the game, then we will make it flash to say it is in control. So it's sort of like pulse on and off. Now with the graphics we've got at the moment, I don't know if that's going to be particularly an easy job to do, but we'll see what we can do with it. Okay, so for that to happen then, each of these podiums needs to have a animator component to it. Now, there are a couple of ways you could do this. You could go into add component and animator like that, and then start creating animations. However, if you have the animation tab open, if you don't see this, by the way, you can find that by going to Window, Animation, or alternatively, you can press the shortcut of Control+6. I'm not entirely certain why it's Control+6, but it is Control+6, and that'll get you this animation tab. And I like to have this tab down at the bottom here because it's a timeline, so it's a very horizontal layout rather than vertical layout, so it kind of works down here for me. But if you want it over on the hierarchy side or at the top, or wherever you want in your layout, it's entirely your decision. But I like to have it down here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to introduce two different animation states to the podiums. One is just a static, like an idle, so it doesn't do anything, it just sits there doing nothing. And then we're going to introduce the pulse effect, so like on, off effect. So there's going to be two different states. I always like to start with the simplest states first, because then they're simple to work with, and then introduce the more complicated ones afterwards. So first of all, we want to begin animating podium blue, so we're going to hit this create button here, and it's going to ask us where we want to save the animation to. So I'm going to drop back into the game folder, go into the animations folder that we created previously, and this is going to ask us for the name of the animation we want, and I'm just going to call this podium idle. So they're idling, it's doing not much, it's just doing very little. That's just a sort of a standard name, I guess, in game programming for idle. It's just sort of like to do nothing, it's just to idle. So podium idle is what I'm going to call this animation, and I'm going to hit save, and it generates me a animation, and it also, as you can see over here, it's added an animator component to it. So now we can start doing stuff. So what are we going to do to animate the lights here? Do we want to introduce a new... Do we want to make the screen flash? Do we want to make the entire podium flash? I think we should maybe make the entire podium flash. Maybe not the text, but certainly the sort of the podium outline or something. So this sort of blue area or whatever. Now this is all one graphic, so it might be a bit difficult if you want to... It all depends on what you want to do here. If you want to introduce a separate graphic to change different elements for the animation or not, entirely your decision. But I'm just going to change this podium graphics color to make it obvious that we are changing it. But if you want to change a different property, then by all means change a different property, add some more elements, some more images to whatever you want. So podium idle, we're going to add a new property to animate. Now we could do this. We could add a new property. I'll show you how to do it this way, and I'll show you another way to do it as well. So we're going to add a property, and it's giving us some options of what we want to change. Now, what we want to change is on the image component of this object. So we're going to go to image, and it's giving us some options here what we want to change. And I said we want to change the color, so I'm going to introduce a color property to change on the animator. And by default, it gives us two key values, one at 0 and one at 1 second, and it is white. It's defaulting to the color that it already is. By default, animations will generate at 60 frames per second. So you can see here, the indication after the seconds mark is number of frames in that second, not necessarily number of milliseconds. Thank you very much for the 3-month sub there, Jack Wilfred, Jackal Clubs even.
Doot doot.
Doot, absolutely. Thank you very much for the 3-month resub, 2-month streak. Jackal Clubs, greatly appreciated. Sorry, I just saw Jack and I went into autopilot because there is also a Jack Wilfred. Sorry, I did a puzzle, Dan. I did a puzzle, Dan. Sorry. Sorry, Jack. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, creates two keyframes, one at 0 seconds, one at 1 second. This is technically at frame 60 because it generates at 60 frames a second. So all we want to do is actually change this to be a darker color, just to say that they're not in control, but still wants to be their dominant color, which is fine because the dominant color is already part of the podium image. So we don't need to worry about too much about that. Just need to change this color to be a darker color. So let's say bring it down to about a V of 50, so half of the intensity that it already had, something like that. And we also need to change the... no, can't do it like that because we're not recording. I forgot, we're not recording. So to change the property, we actually need to be in record mode. So let's click on this record button here to enable recording mode. And now this bar goes red to indicate we are in recording mode. So now we can change it. So now if we change that down to, we set a V of 50. So that's now changed that color to a V of 50 on the HSV scale. And we do also need to change the last keyframe as well, because otherwise it will do this sort of fade in and then back down to half intensity again. So let's just change this last keyframe as well and change that down to 50 as well. So now if we play that, just play the full animation out like that, then it's just holding it at half intensity throughout. Okay, and now let's introduce a new animation, and this time we're going to call this Podium Flash. Podium Flash, to say that we are flashing their podium lights on and off. So Podium Flash, I'm going to hit save, and this time I'm going to give you the shortcut way. So instead of adding the property and doing it this way, you can actually just directly record. So with the record mode on the animation, and you can see this bar is red to say we're in recording mode, then we can just change one of the properties straight off the bat. So let's change this back up to fully bright, so 100. And you can see it's already added a keyframe for us, just like that. It's recognized that we're changing a new property and it's giving us a new keyframe at this time. And I'm just going to make it pulse on and off with a sort of a cycle of a second. So it'll be on for half a second, then off for half a second, just as a simple test. So as I mentioned, this indication of time here is in number of frames, not number of milliseconds, number of microseconds. So the number we're looking for, the key number is 30, 0:30, to say we're at half a second from the start. And then once we've moved to that time frame, we change the value again and bring it back down to 50. And then we need to add another keyframe at the end, otherwise it will think that this here is the end of the animation, which is not true. So we need to add another keyframe at the end, and we're just going to add in the same value of 50. Now, if I at the moment it already believes it's 50, which is not right, but if you change the value and then change it back again, then it realizes that it is a new value. Alternatively, if I undo that change, you can also introduce a new key by right-clicking at the right place, and it gives you the option to add a key, and then it generates a new key with the value it currently is. How did I add that second animation? So over here, below the record button, there is this drop down which has the name of the animation we're currently working with. if you click on that, you can then click on create new clip. It gives you a save dialog to give you to ask for a name of a new clip. Give it whatever name you want, and then it should select that one by default, and then it should have a new clip to work with. So I've added 3 keyframes here. One to say full intensity, another one at half a second to say go down to half intensity, and one at 1 second to make certain that the full animation is still 1 full second in duration. Otherwise, if we didn't have this keyframe, Unity will think that the animation ends at half a second, so when it does a loop of it, it will just go on, off, on, which is not what we want. We want on, off in sort of, half a second intervals. However, let's try playing this and see what it looks like. It's alright, but it's not what I wanted. It's not quite on, off, solid states as we want. It's currently doing a fade. That's because by default, Unity will try and sort of lerp, if you know that term, linearly interpolate, or tween in between certain values. So if we actually look at the curves that it's generated, I mean, you can't really see much. However, if you drag a box out to select these first 2 keyframes, and then press F, which is the standard shortcut for focus, then you can see exactly what it's doing on this particular value. Now, we're only seeing one of the colors here. We're actually looking at the blue channel because it's blue. You can see this blue color here. This indicates what color it appears as here in this chart. Technically, they're all stacked on top of each other, but we can only see the blue one because it's the topmost one, I guess. But you can see that it's doing this sort of ease in, ease out curve, which in most cases is probably what you want. But in this case, it isn't what we want. We would rather it have a steep, stays exactly at the right value we want, and then it just jumps down to the value afterwards. And Unity does have that. So if we have that, all these keyframes selected, so if we take a box, drag a box around this keyframe, which should have all of those 3 color key values referenced, so the red, the green, and the blue key values. And then if we right click, there should be an option to change it so that it remains constant. So if we go to both tangents, I mean, in this case, because it's the starting keyframe, you can actually either do right tangent or both tangents. Either will work. And we select constant. What that will do is it will keep that value completely constant until it sees a new keyframe. And then at that point, it takes that value. So instead of having to finagle and add a new keyframe here, which then does a sharp interpolation at the end, you can use a constant keyframe to keep the value completely constant from what it was until a new keyframe comes along, and then it assumes that is the new value and then continues any interpolation from that point onwards. So we get this lovely square wave, I guess you can call it. And if we give this a playback, we can see that it's now doing a perfect sort of on-off effect. Exactly what we want. Beautiful. So that's a nice little pulsing effect. Cool. I think we're done with that. And those are the only 2 states that we need to worry about for the podium. So there's an idle and there's a flash. We'll come back to this in a moment. We need to add this to the other podiums though, because we only added this to podium blue. Now, at this point, we've already created the animations. So we don't want to create a new animator. That would be a wasteful thing to do. I mean, you could create an animator for the green, the white, and the red as well, but you'll be creating duplicate animations that have already been achieved. So instead of creating a clip, we're going to add in the animator component and then re-reference the animations we've already used. So to do that, on podium green, we're going to add a component, and we're going to add an animator, OR on the end. There is a different component called animation. You do not want that. That is a legacy one. But we don't want to worry about that. We want to use the animator, so animator component. Add that, and it's going to ask for a controller. And the controller we've already created, if we click on the circle to pick an asset that we've already created, and it's got an asset called Podium Blue, which is the one we've generated. Now, the name of this animator controller we never actually specified at any point. So when we created the first animation for Podium Blue, it just presumed that the name of the animator controller should just be the name of that object that we animated, which is half right. Technically speaking, in our case, it's just a podium animator, so we can rename that after the fact. But let's just quickly associate this one to Podium Blue. And once we did that, you can see in the animation tab it's already populated it with the correct animations. So if we just test Podium Idle, you can see Podium Idle, it's just nice and simple, just holding on to that. And if we test with Podium Flash, then it flashes the podium. That's exactly what we want it to do. Beautiful. Let's also do that same change to Podium White and Podium Red. So same again, with Podium White selected now, click Add Component. And it's remembered from last time that we wanted an animator component, so just hit enter, and then again select the controller from the assets list, and we want Podium Blue. And then with Podium Red selected in the hierarchy, add component, again another animator component, and then for the controller asset we select Podium Blue. Now I'm just going to quickly change the name of that controller so that it's a bit more indicative of what it is rather than being specifically Podium Blue. So if I select the box of any of these sort of asset references, if I have the project tab open, it actually jumps to where that is in the project. So just quickly again, with the project tab open, if I left click this element here, then it jumps me to exactly where that is in the assets. And I'm going to select Podium Blue. I'm going to rename it. So rename is F2 as a default, as a standard shortcut on Windows. Just delete the word blue and just call that a Podium animator component. Animator controller, sorry, not component, controller. And everything should still be okay. Yep, Podium is using a Podium animator and they're all using the same one. You may notice that Bob, Podium Blue, is currently looking a little dark at the moment, even though we're not playing any animations. That's because we edited this, or at least I edited this color while we were not in recording mode. So remember I mentioned about recording mode, and the first time I did, I accidentally didn't have record mode on. So what Unity interpreted that as was that I actually changed the actual property of the object rather than the property in the animation. So all I'm going to do is just set that back up to white and everything's good. So long as I'm not in record mode, then I'm not actually editing the animation. I'll be editing the actual object. I am at this point going to save and save project because we've done some changes and I don't want to lose those. Next thing we need to do... Oh, hello. Bob has gone back to being that colour. Let's just do that again. There we go. That may have been because I was in preview mode. Ah, yes, that's because I was in preview mode. So, out of preview mode, change the colour to white, hit save and save project. Everything is good. Okay, so we've set the animations up, but we haven't set any of the sort of logic up yet for the animations. How they work, how you transition between them, how you trigger them. So let's start configuring some of that. To do that, we will need to go into the Animator tab. So to do that, go to Window, Animation, go to Animator, T-O-R, and it brings us with this. Alternatively, if you have an animator component up like this and you have a controller, you can double click this field here and it will jump you to the Animator tab and open it up for you. So that's a little shortcut for you. Instead of trying to find where it is in the window menu, you can just double click the controller in the animator component and it jumps you to that asset. So this is what we currently have. We have a state tree, which you can use the middle mouse wheel to zoom in and out of like this. By the way, this is actually a relatively recent addition to Unity. In like Unity 5 and the early days of Unity 2017, you couldn't zoom. You couldn't zoom in animation state trees. So yeah, that's a thing. And this sort of describes how the animations will transition from one another. So you have this thing called entry. Now this is a special state that basically says, what is the state that I should transition to or use when I start animating? So when I start in the game mode, which animation should I use? And you can see this orange or brownish arrow pointing to Podium Idle. So because we created Podium Idle first, the animator controller generates a link to that as the default entry state. In our case, that is correct. However, if you want to change what state is the default state when the animator starts, you can right click on the entry to go set state machine default state, and it'll give you this arrow, and then you hover over the state that you want to be the default, and then left click, and then it changes that association. But we want to go back to being default being Podium Idle, because that's what a podium should be by default, is idle. Okay, now we also want to have some transitions to and from idle to flash and back again, but we don't want them to just transition all the time. They want to be controlled by some parameter. So what we need to do is introduce a parameter to do that. So let's go to the parameters option here. At the top of this animator tab, there's an option called parameters, and it says that there is a empty list. There's no parameters yet, which is what we'd expect because we haven't introduced any yet. So let's introduce a parameter by going to this plus button, and we want to introduce a Boolean parameter. So it's basically a toggle to say whether we are in flashing mode or not. So we're going to introduce a Boolean, and this Boolean we're going to call flashing. Just a nice simple, nice and descriptive, just the word flashing, and hit enter to set that name. So we have a flashing parameter, and this here indicates the default value of that parameter, and by default we don't want them flashing, so we're just going to leave that as an unchecked tick box, but you can check it if you want it by default to flash or not. Then we need to configure some transitions between the states. So to introduce some transitions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition from idle to flash first. So to do that, right click on Podium Idle, and the first option in the drop down is to make a transition. So I'm going to click that, and then it creates a new arrow, and I'm going to hover over Podium Flash and then left click, and that adds a transition from idle to flash. I actually also want to transition back the other way as well, because we want to go back to idle from flash if we no longer want to flash. So I'm also going to set another one up. So I'm going to right click on Podium Flash, go to make transition, and then go to Podium Idle. So now we've got this sort of circular relationship here where idle can transition to flash and flash can transition to idle. But if I were to go into game mode, just as an example, just to show you what it would do, because we haven't actually configured that parameter yet, but if I just show you now what that does by default, you'll see that it does weird things. It has this sort of fade in, and then it does the pulse, and then it doesn't, and yeah, it's a weird effect. If I select Podium Blue, for example, and go to the animated tab while we're still live in play mode, you actually get to see this auto live mode. So this actually shows you where it is in the state tree and how it's transitioning. So let me just pause it so you can see exactly what it's doing. So at the moment I've paused it in Podium Idle, and this blue bar here indicates how far along the idle animation we are. So we're currently about halfway through the animation. And if I continue sort of stepping through, so we can, while we're in pause mode, we can hit this button on the right called step, and it steps the game on by an extra frame at a time. So I'm going to keep stepping through, and at some point we're going to see this arrow here start to turn blue. Just about there we go. So we have started the transition here. So as you can see, this arrow is starting to turn blue. This also sort of does as a progression like this does, and this is now indicating that we are starting a transition from Podium Idle into Podium Flash, and Podium Flash is already starting to play to get ahead of the time to get ready for the transition to occur. So now this is playing, this is also playing, but it's playing based on this transition happening. And the transition will just sort of linearly interpolate between the two different animations if they have similar properties. So both of them have color properties, so it's actually doing a linear interpolation from the idle color, which is that half intensity, to the Podium Flash color, which is full intensity at the moment in this animation. And if you keep stepping through, it keeps doing that, and then the transition is complete, so the transition arrow is gone. This is now no longer animating because the blue bar is not there. So this one is now in full control and is now currently playing its animation. And with it still being in the first half, it should be in, yes, full brightness. But as we keep playing it through, it gets to past the halfway point, and now it's at the half brightness because that's what we configured that animation for. And if we keep stepping through, as we get nearer the end of the animation, there it is, the transition is starting again, and now we're transitioning back from flash to idle. So as you can see, by default, it just keeps cycling through the animations because we haven't given it any controls. We haven't set any restrictions on the animations. So they're just going to keep transitioning to and fro. So let's start putting in some constraints, or conditions, I guess you could also say. So let's select this idle to flash transition. So selected it, it's gone blue, and on the inspector you can see it's got this sort of these settings. So the first thing you can see here, this is sort of the duration for the transition that it's going to be using. And in fact, let me drop down the settings section so you can see more of the information on what it's doing. So what do all of these values mean? So has exit time tick? This is a restriction to say whether the transition can exit at a specific time or whether it can transition whenever it wants. In this case, has exit time has a tick, which means it can only transition if it is at a certain point in the animation. And as you can see, with exit time being 0.75, that means it will only transition when it hits the 0.75 of the animation. Because our animations are 1 second long, that means it's 0.75 seconds through the animation. So once it's hit 0.75 seconds in the animation, it will then do the exit. We don't want it to be controlled specifically at a specific time, because if we want to trigger the flashing, we want it to happen instantaneously. So we're going to turn has exit time off and make that false. You may notice this at the bottom has appeared, where it says transition needs at least one condition or an exit time to be valid, otherwise it will be ignored. So this is telling us, because we have nothing restricting when it can trigger the transition, it's just going to do the transition. We will fix this in a moment when we introduce a condition for the parameter, but I'm going to continue going through these settings. Fixed duration is ticked. Now this, it controls this property here called transition duration. If you use a fixed duration, you're going to be defining the amount of time for the transition as a absolute time, so a time in seconds. If you turn this to false, then you can see that this changes to a percentage. So instead of it being the absolute amount of seconds, it's now, in this case, 25% of the animation duration. Again, in our case, we don't actually want it to have any transition time. We just want it to just snap into flashing mode or not. So it doesn't matter if fixed duration is on or off in this case, but what we want is to have the transition duration be 0 seconds. So as soon as we want it to change over, then it will change over in 0 seconds. And transition offset, this is the amount of time, a normalized amount of time, so 0 to 1 meaning the duration of the sort of the relative duration of the animation clip, and offset into how far into the animation we want to start. So if I was to set this as 0.5, then when we did the transition, it will do the transition into the halfway point of our Podium Flash animation, which is not what we want, because that will just make it do exactly the same as what Podium Idle is currently doing. So we're just going to set that to 0 because we want to start the new animation from its starting point, i.e. the 0 point. Interruption source, do not worry about this field for the time being. This is only to resolve very complicated animation state machines. Do not worry about it right now. This is an advanced concept that even I get messed up on sometimes when we try and do player animations. So ignore that completely. Just make certain it's set to none. You do not need to worry about it. Last thing then is to look at these conditions, which we currently have no conditions for. So we want this transition to only occur if we have the flashing parameter set to true, because we want to transition from idle to flash if we want to be flashing. So we introduce a new condition by hitting the plus, and then because it's the only parameter available, it sets to flashing. But if we had more than one condition, we can then select what condition we want, what parameter we want to check, and then the option is that we want to check to see if it is true. And yes, by default we do want it to be true, so flashing true. So this transition will only happen if this condition holds. Now, while we're at it, we might as well change the other transition to do basically the same but in reverse. So, has exit time? No, we don't want it to have a specific exit time. We just want to have it happen whenever we say so, exactly when we want it. So we take that off. Transition duration, again, we just want it to just snap back. So again, we just want to set that to 0. Everything else we don't need to worry about. And then we just need to introduce a condition. So add plus, click the plus button to add a new condition. Condition is the flashing parameter. And this time we want it to be false because we want to go back to idle from the flash animation if we want flashing to be false. So just to recap, we now have two transitions, one from idle to flash, one from flash to idle. Idle to flash will only occur if this condition is met, flashing is true, and the transition from flash to idle will only happen if this condition is met, flashing is false. So if we hit save and then hit play, go into play mode, we'll see that by default they are going to sit in the idle animation, and it's not going to do much because we currently have no programmatic control over those parameters. However, I can demonstrate that the parameters will control it. So if I select Podium Blue, for example, and let me drag out that animator tab so you can see this alongside the game view. So currently it's sitting in Podium Idle, but if I click on the flashing option up here and change it to a checked option so flashing becomes true, then you can see it just immediately jumped to Podium Flash, and now the podium is flashing. And if you want to go back the other way and change it back into idle mode, we just click this again to make it flashing false, and it jumps back to flashing false, so back into the idle animation. And we can do this to all of the different animators. So go back to green, we want to do that again, just change the flashing option. So green podium is now flashing, and we don't want to flash anymore. Back to that. So that's the animator controller configured as far as we need to for this. Now we need to add in the programmatic control so that we can have have the game change those states for us, or maybe the podium to change those states for us. So let's start doing that now. Let's go to one of the podiums because we're going to change this. Can we do it on the button? I don't believe we can. I'm going to quickly look at it, but I don't believe we can. So let me just quickly check to see if there's an option we can do that. Animator. Does it actually bring in that parameter or not? I don't believe it does. You can set triggers, but you cannot set booleans, unfortunately, because those will require two parameters. So yeah, unfortunately we can't just do that as a simple event call, so we're going to have to add in some code to do this. So what we're going to do, first of all, is bring in the... what the hell noise was that? What was that noise? Be right back. He's fine, he's fine. It's just neighbours being neighbours, making noises. I can hear it quite acutely, but it might not have been picked up by the mic. Don't worry, we will edit that part out. Water. So yeah, we need programmatic control. So, first thing is going to add a new field to the podium. So let's go to the podium script. Here is the podium script. That was never seen again. So here we are at the podium script. So you can see we've added this audio source. This was from the homework from last time as we added this audio source. We're going to add a new field here that we're going to store the animator for. So to do that, we're going to have a public because we need to have other things in the game access it. So make it public. Hello again, Whiskers. The type we want here is animator, A-N-I-M-A-T-O-R, and we're just going to call it animator, just nice and simple, animator, and hit save. And what we're actually going to do is I'm going to introduce a property to do this, because this would be a nice simple way to achieve the effect with a property. Because we're just going to do this with programmatic control. And in fact, with a property, we can probably make it... we could, in theory, have the button trigger it with a property. So let's introduce a property into this. If you're familiar with C# terminology, these here are called fields. And they are just straight, simple variables. So public audio source, that is just a field. It's just a simple variable that is a member of this podium. Properties are a little more complex in that they could have a backing field, which stores information, but it could also be just a getting and setting set of methods for getting some sort of value out of it. We did introduce this at some point. I forget where we introduced a property. In fact, here it is. We introduced a property to make attack chance active work from the button. This is just sort of a necessity of how the button events work, and we just had to introduce this as a property. Ideally, this would probably be a field in the world of Unity, but I guess for events, it needed to be a property. This time, we're going to use a property to control that parameter state, because it's nice and easy doing it that way, and it's a good demonstration of what a property can do as opposed to just being basic. In this case, a property is basically a field in disguise, whereas in this case we're going to use it more as two different methods for achieving what looks like a variable but isn't. Okay. So we're going to introduce a public, because again, we're going to have other parts of the game talk to this. It's going to be a Boolean value, because that is what what that parameter is. It's just a Boolean value, true or false. So public bool, and we're going to call it flashing. We're just going to call it flashing, because again, that makes sense for it. And then we're going to start a new line, and we're going to have some braces. So this is starting to look a bit like this is. And properties tend to always have a get and a set part. However, this time we're actually going to define those explicitly, what we want them to be. So flashing get, and open up some new braces. Does not have to be the same name, Quizzy Dan. This here could be absolutely any name I want it to be, and we'll be able to work it with the animator in a moment. But for the sake of making the code make sense to the rest of the game and to make sense to us, I'm just going to call it the same as the parameter. But it does not have to be the same name, because you'll see in a moment where the actual key element comes for the naming. So it does not have to be the same name, but in this case it makes sense to be the same name. So we're going to create a get, and it's got this underline because a getter must return something, because the objective of a get inside of a property is to return the value for this property. So we're expecting to return some sort of Boolean value. So in order to do that, we need to make it return something. So return, and I think this is the first time we've actually got a method that returns an actual value. Yes, it is. So here we use return just to finish a void method. A void means it's typeless, it means it does not have anything to return, so we didn't need to specify anything. However, we're actually now going to return something because we need to return a Boolean in some regard. So return, and what we need to talk to is the animator. So animator dot, because we want to talk to that object in some way, so animator dot to reference it. And then we want to get a Boolean out of it. So get bool is the name of the method, and what this will do is it will get the Boolean value for a particular parameter in this animator state machine. As it is a method, we need to open up some parentheses, and it's giving us two options here. We can either do an int ID, or we can do a string name. Now, if you're going absolutely hell for leather for performance, you would do an int ID and do it a different way. But because we're only really doing this a little bit, I don't care about the performance penalty for doing this with a straight string name. But if you're interested in more performance things, then look up how you get an animator ID, and then you can use that instead. But in our case, we're just going to use a string name. So we want to get the parameter in the animator, which is a Boolean type, and the name that we gave that, if we look back at Unity, was, or if we let Unity do its thing, we did call it flashing. So this here, if I remember to use a semicolon at the end of the line because we finished the line, this is a getter in this property, and what it will do is it will return the Boolean value from this animator component of the property of the parameter that is called flashing. So this flashing parameter, whatever its state is here. And that's all well and good, we're getting it, but we're not setting it. So we can then also introduce a setter into this property. And a setter is essentially a void method, so we don't have to return anything. But it makes sense that we want to change something with it. And setters, by default, will have a value variable inside of it. This here, as you can see, is blue. It's a special keyword, and inside of setters, value is sort of the value that we are setting with. So it's sort of the parameter we are passing into this setter method, which will be a Boolean because that's what the type of this parameter is. But what we want to do with it is we want to go back again to the animator because we're changing the parameter on the animator. Dot, because we're talking to the animator. This time we're going to do set bool, which, you know, it logically makes sense in comparison to the method called get bool. Again, it's giving us two options, either the int ID or the string name version. We're going to use the string name version. We're going to change the Boolean parameter called flashing and use a comma because we need to have another parameter in this method. So it's two parameters in this method, as you can see. And the second parameter is the value we want to set. And as I said just a moment ago, setters have a special keyword called value, which is the value parameter that is passed into this setter method. And because this is the end of the line, we need to use a semicolon. And then we hit save. And then what that means is we now have a property called flashing that we can either get the value of, or set the value of, and doing so will change that parameter on the animator component. So if we go back to Unity, it will probably do its thing and start thinking about stuff. You won't see anything appear in the component layout here in this inspector, apart from this animator that we introduced. You will not see this appear. As I mentioned before in the first episode, Unity will only expose fields to the inspector. However, you can use properties as if you want to, and in this case we are going to use it because it's a nice convenient way of changing these values inside of code. But we do introduce this new animator field, so let's quickly add those and configure those. So we need to drag in the animator. We can either drag in the animator component directly on that object, or we can actually drag from the object itself onto it, and it figures out that it needs to get the animator out of it. Either or will work. I'm just going to quickly configure all these 4 podiums the same way. So podium blue, podium green, podium white, and podium red now all have a reference to their animator in some way like that. If that makes sense. And then what we can do, because the game is the one that has all control over which podium is in control, then we can use that to set whether the podium should flash or not. So let's go to the Unity Workshop project in Visual Studio, go to Game. And we need to go into this select podium method here. So this is called, if we go actually back to Unity, remember from here, one of the events of each podium's click event is to call this select podium method with itself. So if we come back to the code, it will call this method with the podium that has just been selected. So what we want to actually do is, if we've already got a podium selected, we need to stop them from flashing before we move on to the new podium that has been selected. And then once we have selected a new podium, then we can set them to be flashing. So the first thing we're going to do in this method then, before we select the new podium, is we need to check to see if this is already been set, i.e. we're going to be doing a null check, and if it is already set, then we need to stop them from flashing. So above this line, but inside of these braces, we're going to introduce a if condition. So if, open parentheses, this inside the parentheses will be the actual condition for this if, and we want to check to see if selected podium is not equal to null. Now, as I mentioned in the previous episode, my font does special things with characters. This line should read as if selected podium equals null, like that. So that's what that line should read as in the official characters. As I say, my Fontfira code does special things to that combination of characters and formats it as a sort of not equal sign to make it more readable to the coder. It's not easier for new people to get into it, because obviously this isn't really a symbol that most people would know in terms of finding it in Unicode. But these two are easier to understand. So exclamation mark equals means not equal to, a not equal comparison. So if selected podium is not equal to null, i.e. we have something in the selected podium already, then we open up a set of braces. So just to quickly clarify again what an if block does. So it checks this condition, and if this condition is met, then this code is called inside of these braces. If this condition is not met, then it doesn't do what is in the braces and it just jumps over to the next part. So if selected podium is not equal to null, then we need to stop it from flashing. So we go to the selected podium, dot, because we're talking to it, and now we should see, yes, we've now got this new thing called flashing, this property. So selected podium dot flashing, and we want to stop that. So we set that to equal to false. So selected podium dot flashing equals false. Likewise, we now need to add in some code down here to check if selected podium is now not null afterwards, and if it is not null, then we need to set them to be actually flashing. So we basically do exactly the same. I don't normally condone copy pasting, but in this case it's a small snippet, so I'll allow it. So you can select this block of code with Control C, and then after this selected podium line, you can then go Control V to paste it. And then instead of setting flashing to false in this case, we want to set it to true. Just like that. So, just to recap this, what this full method does, because it goes in order. So we first check to see if we've already got a podium before we select a new podium. If we already do, then we want to set their flashing state to false. Then we set our new podium with selected podium here. If this new podium is not null, then we set their flashing state to true. That is now how select podium works. There is one other case we need to worry about, which is reset podium, which if we look here, this button here, this podium reset button, will call this method that we configured before on this onClick event. And we actually need to do essentially what this already does. So one way we can do this is literally copy paste this block of code here and put this before selected podium gets set to null. And that could be a way of doing it. Another way we can do this is actually have reset podium call this method and call it with null, because that is what we're doing. We're literally selecting the podium to be null. And we've already added this and this to protect against any situations where we may be selecting a null podium, i.e. resetting the current podium. So in fact, what I'm going to do is delete this code we already have here in reset podium, and instead we're going to call select podium and give it the parameter of null. So let's do that. Select podium is the name of the method. Open up parentheses to say we want to set the parameters, and I want to set that to null. Close the parentheses and end the line as always with a semicolon. So what this will do when we hit the reset podium method is it will do select podium, so this method, and we want to select the podium as null. Okay. Now if we go back into Unity, in theory, so long as we have all our animators hooked up, everything should work. I'm going to clear out the console, hit the play button. Nothing happens at the moment, they're all nice and dark, but if I select a podium, just like that, this goes green to say we have that selected, but it also starts the podium flashing. So with the podium flashing, we can add in whatever ones we want. And then if I reset the podium, then Mrs. Yakko is no longer flashing. We go back to the flashing false state, the idle state. And we also had the other condition where we could select different people at once, and whoever was the last one selected will be the one flashing. So if I select Dog, then if I select someone else to have control, then in theory Dog should stop flashing and then Whiskers should start flashing. And that is exactly what happens. Dog stops flashing, Whiskers starts flashing. So now we have animation control over these 4 different podiums, and they have different states, so different clips, different. So we have the idle and we have the flashing, and we now have programmatic control over that, so that we can control whether they flash or not flash, based off of what we have configured in the game. Does that make sense to everyone? Is there anyone that haven't had any questions? Okay, so I just watched the duel finally between Harry and Tipster. You're terrified, are you, Egg? Well, yes, you are rightfully terrified after watching that. Apologies for backtracking, but if I want to do the flash with separate images instead of changing colours, should I play with the is enable property of the animation? So, if you want to change the image, then let me quickly do that as an example. So let me select Podium Blue and go to the animation tab. and let's change podium flash. So instead of changing image color, what you can actually do is you can change the source image on the image. So at the moment it's using podium blue, but if you have a different image for them being lit, let's just for example say I want to change it to use the white image when it's lit instead of doing image color. So let's just do that as an example. So I go into record mode, change the source image to podium white. Make sure you hit record. Yes, definitely make sure you are in recording mode before you do any changes. So at keyframe 0, we've added podium white, and then at keyframe 30, I changed that to podium blue. Then you can do that. You can change the image for each one. Now, you'll find because we have 4 podiums that are sharing the same animator, that's going to get complicated if you have different images for different podiums, because now you'll have to introduce a new animation for a different flash for each podium. At that point, you would need to create a different animator controller for each one so that you can specify different images for each one, but they can use the same sort of animation names and you can still have the same parameter names. But yeah, to have different images like that, probably not the best way to do it that way. However, the other way you suggested there could work. So if we added a new image, so new UI image to each podium and put it at the top of the stack, for example, and use the little shortcut, so click and do Shift and Alt and click at the bottom right to fill, and give it sort of the highlighted effect to do the highlighted effect. Oh, stop changing the language. So we've got the highlighted podium effect, and this needs to be preserve aspect, so it's the same layout. I'm just going to rename that as the sort of light, I guess you can call it, light effect. What I might do is actually just change that to yellow, because white is not, this white would flash to white is a bit wrong. But if I quickly just configure this and add them to these other podiums, just quickly configuring it. Remember that the order in the hierarchy matters. The further up they are in the tree, the earlier they will draw. So if you have things like, well, like we've just done here. In fact, why are the text and that not drawing? They should be drawing. Why are they not drawing? They should draw. Hello? 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 Why are you no draw? What? Why is it no draw? Where have they gone? Where have they gone? They're definitely there. All I did was added that, and now that it seems to have disappeared. Where's the text gone? I wasn't expecting this to happen. Well, that's a clutch. I've never seen that happen. Let's go through the undo stack and see what the hell happened. Can we go far enough back in the undo stack to fix things? Oh, no. I do know what happened. No, I do know. When we duplicate these lights, they duplicate in the same place as the original object, but that's not necessarily what we want here. So that's what we want there. There we go. There we go. I'm fixing things as we go on. So we're good. Now each one has a light. Obviously, we don't want those on by default, so I'm just going to turn them off by default, like that. And then what we can do in the animator, in Podium Flash, is if we record, we can actually go to the light. So select the light object in the hierarchy and check the active flag, which we've not actually used yet in the Unity Workshop, but you can turn things on and off with this toggle up here. So that's an option you can do, is to toggle things on and off, and it introduces this new property called light game object is active. So with the flash, we want it to be on for the first half and then off, and then just add another keyframe at the end so that we know what we're doing, like that. So we do that kind of thing. And we also want to make certain that in the idle that by default light is off. So I just went into record mode and did active and deactivate it just to make certain it remembered that value. And we add another keyframe at the end, like that. So now we've introduced a new object. So really this color property makes no difference, but I'm going to leave that there because I'm going to revert back to where we were. But what we do now, if we now play and change those, now that we've changed those animations, and each one has a light game object as a parent, as a child, sorry. Then as we select one, it now uses that image, and you can see as we're in live mode, you can see the sort of the active state of that object turning on and off. So in your case, Pop Ramen Comedy, you can have a light object as a child. As long as they're named the same way in each podium, you can then have a different graphic, and you can just go active, on, off, on, off, on, off to do this. So that is another way you could do it if you have a separate graphic for your light state. So you can do that instead. And that will do the same thing. So that's another way you can do it. Does that make sense to you, Pop Ramen Comedy? Yes, good. All right. Just in my example, I'm going to delete those and return back to those animations and delete the properties we don't want. Just like that. I mean, they're too clever that these things are not clever enough. Well, like, I'm giving you very basic tutorials here. If you want to go and investigate further, if you want to sort of jump ahead of the class, then by all means do so. I encourage that kind of investigative nature. And I'll still be able to help out in Unity Workshop if you do run into any weird issues with that. So yeah, if you want to do different things, but still within the same sort of project, and you need some help on other things, then yeah, Unity Workshop will still be the place for that. So yeah, that's how you can get things to animate in a very basic sense and change from animation to animation via code. Anybody else have any questions before we move on? I'm going to close that. Don't need that right now. Just going to check Discord for anything, because I'm going to do something else, wasn't I? What I'm thinking tonight is going to end at about 7 PM rather than 8 PM, because that's when Brig will be sort of starting his watch along for Schlagden Star. So I'll be ending slightly earlier today, because I only really have one other thing I want to talk about today. But it is a biggie. It is a biggie, this particular one. And this is where it gets really into the world of question presentation. We're going to be starting to introduce data into these projects. Still can't imagine the work that went into 1100 to do lighting effects, etc., the wall, etc. Well, things like that, Egg, require a couple of years experience in games development. Let's put it that way. That required specific UV remapping of all the podiums, required special shaders to do the effects. The lighting requires understanding how the HDR pipeline works, how lighting works, how baked lighting works. There's a lot of stuff in there, Egg, that you don't really see. You don't really sort of comprehend, let's put it that way. Yeah, r/whoosh, absolutely. This is literal basics. We haven't even gone into the third dimension yet. I just don't want to complicate things with the third dimension, let's put it that way. I'm in the awkward position of having tons and tons of exactly the wrong experience. Oh, I know that feels. I know that feels, Matt. Careful, or there might be head explosion. Game development in C++ with developing proprietary engines in OpenGL and DirectX. I'm sort of boggling about how nicely convenient this is. Oh, God. I remember those days, Matt, because literally literally throughout my entire uni course, we had to develop our own game engines. Unity was still way too recent that I don't think any uni courses were using Unity at the time, because they just daren't use it. I know for certain they do use it on the course that I did do now in the updated syllabus, alongside also using Unreal Engine, because that's a different sort of a different engine. It has a different way of doing things. So yeah, I've gone about it the same kind of way that I started doing specific game development in C++, a specific game engine development, going into the mobile games industry with having to use that, and then pivoting going into Unity, because literally everyone under the sun uses some sort of game engine because they can't be bothered to write specific shader code or write specific engine code now for all the different platforms there are. There's 3 things I'm very much looking forward to discussing: timers, nicely evolving backgrounds, services passing questions in and out from external file, etc. Okay. Well, certainly the questions from an external file, we're going to sort of half get through that. Half. I'm going to introduce the concept of scriptable objects first, and then afterwards we can start looking into maybe CSV file reading, writing, that kind of thing. Almost exactly 10 years in Flash informs my previous comments about my cleverness. Ideally, I'm hoping that I can make things with a host screen and display screen. That is a little more complicated, Quizzy Dan, but is sort of simple to set up. Sort of simple. I can maybe quickly cover that at the end of this stream if we have time. But it is a sort of a different workflow. Let's put it that way. Those days were 2 months ago. I upgraded an OpenGL engine from old one enough to use a fixed function pipelines. Oh my god. Fixed function pipelines. Oh, those are the days. Display 2 is definitely a thing, Dan. Yes, indeed it is. And that's what you would have to use to do a multi-screen setup. But to get the game to launch in a build with multi-screen setup, you do have to do a bit more hoop jumping. Right. Scriptable objects is what we're going to be talking about now. Scriptable objects, what are they? So, at the moment, we've just been dealing with these game objects, and yeah, we've got this data and sort of this information that we've specified on these game objects, on these components, but they always have to be associated to something in the hierarchy. What if I just want just raw data? So like just questions. What if I just want a question and answer or something in a file? How do I do that instead of having to, lump it into one of these components? So to do that, you use a thing called a scriptable object, which is basically an object, but it has a script based on it, so scriptable object, but you don't have to have it associated directly to any of these objects. So you can just create an asset in your game's assets that is just like a question. You could say that is a scriptable object, or a bank of questions, or something like that. What we're going to start out with is making a simple question asset, and then we're going to configure some basic layout thing on screen here to present that question, maybe then present the answer to it, and we'll do some sort of animation so we can have them animate in, show the question, show the answer, animate out, that kind of thing. That's a sort of standard workflow for showing and revealing a question and answer. And then we'll advance that a bit more with like question banks. But first of all, we're going to start off with just a simple question. So we're going to introduce a new script. So in assets, game scripts, we want to create a new script file. So to do that, we're going to right click, go to create, go to C# script, and we're going to rename this as question. We're going to say that this is a question. So named as question, hit enter to confirm that, and then we want to start editing it. So let's double click question, and once Unity's done its thing, we have this. Now by default, it creates a question as a mono behavior, which is what we've been working with so far, but we don't want it to be a mono behavior this time around. We want it to be a scriptable object. So instead of being mono behavior, we're going to change this name to say scriptable object with a capital S and a capital O. And it's giving me that as the confirmation. And also with this being data, it doesn't actually really have any methods. You can use methods. We may get into that in a future episode, but not right now. So we're just going to delete the content of that right now. So this is what we have so far, is a question, which is a scriptable object. Now, What does a question have? Well, in a sort of classic example in Panel Quiz Attack, it is just a simple question, has a simple answer to it. So it'll have some question text, and it'll have some answer text, and that's about it. So we're just going to introduce 2 fields to this scriptable object. We're going to call this public string, because we want other things in the game to access it, so it's a public string, because that is the type for text in coding, certainly in C#. And this is going to be called question text. And we're going to end the line with a semicolon. And we also want to introduce an answer to this. What is a question? We just do not know. That's very rhetorical, Quizzy Dan. Very rhetorical. We also want an answer to this, so public string. So public, again, other things in the game want to access it. String, because that is what text is stored in. And this is going to be answer text. Now, if you're having a different kind of question so that your answers are always going to be a numerical response, then by all means change this string to say int instead. So if you know that they're always going to be numbers, then use an int type for your answer instead, and maybe change it to be an answer number or answer value. But in this case, we're just going to leave it open for interpretation. We're just going to say there's going to be some question text and some answer text, just like that. And we're going to hit save, and let's go back into Unity. So we now have a question type. That seems simple enough. But how do we create it? How do we create one? Well, we can try creating one. So if we go to _game, normally when we create an asset, we right click in some regard. So let's right click. Let's go to create. And we're not seeing anything. I can't see any question type or anything like that. It's just not here. How do I do it? So by default, this doesn't give you any leverage to be able to create the object as an asset very easily, which is, it's a bit of a faff, I guess. It's just like, why it's not provided by default, I don't know, but it's a decision they've made. However, they have introduced something that does make it at least easy enough to add a option to add it, to be able to add it as a option on the asset menu. To do that, we're going to use what is known as an attribute in C#. If you are familiar with Python, they are, I think, the right thing to compare them to is called a decorator. But if you know neither of those things, do not worry. Just consider this as black magic, and it just does the thing for you. In essence, what it is, it's giving us some metadata to the class that then the rest of the engine can read into and sort of understand what it needs to do. So we're going to introduce a attribute to this class that tells Unity we want to add it to the asset menu in some way. So to do that, on the line directly above this public class question scriptable object line, so here on line 5, open up a square bracket, and we want to type create asset menu, capital C, capital A, capital M. So this is the special kind of attribute type, which will mean we want to add something to the asset menu creation. Open up parentheses, and we want to start filling in these properties. So it's asking for a file name, it's also asking for a menu name, and it's also asking for an order. So file name by default, it's just whatever you want the default name to be when we create a new one. So I'm just going to say it is a question. So what this means is when we go right click create question, it will create an asset for us called question. If you want that to be called something else, then by all means change this string here, but question makes sense to be the default name for a new question. Second option, menu name. This is what will appear on the create menu itself. So when you see go to assets create, this is the literal text that appears on that menu. In this case, it's probably going to be the same. We're going to say question. So we have default file name is the first parameter, and we're going to say that default file name is question. The menu name that appears on the menu itself, we're also going to say it's a question. The third option is an order. We don't actually have to specify that. In fact, we don't have to specify any of these. You can just leave it as that and it will try and guess what you want. But at least you can have some control over it with these. I tend not to bother with the order option. However, if you're interested in what that does, what that is used for is to tell Unity in what order they should appear in on the menu. So I forget which way around the number is, but I think lower numbers, so smaller numbers, will appear higher on the menu, and larger numbers will appear lower on the menu. So they're sort of done in numerical order. I'm not going to bother with specifying that, so I'm just going to leave it as question. Does not contain a constructor that takes 2 arguments. Yes, it does. It just straight up does. Oh, is it because we have to specify them? Do we have to specify them? Sometimes in the language you do have to specify them. I think you do in this case. Okay, so what we're going to actually have to do is specify the variables here. So what we want to do is change the file name parameter with that. The best F overload does not have a parameter named file name. Yes, it does. It demonstrably does. Like that. There we go. That's what we want. Sorry. So that is what we want to see. It likes that. It's happy with that. So just take that as magic. So the full line is open square bracket, create asset menu, open parentheses, file name with a lowercase f, uppercase n, equal sign, some string for the default file name, comma, menu name, lowercase m, uppercase n, equals some string for the menu name. We're going to again define question. Now if we hit save and go back into Unity and let it think for a little bit. I think it's had its think. Now if we go and right click in our assets, go to create. Just at the top there, we now have a new option called question. And if we click that, it creates a new asset with the default name we specified of question. And now we can just create a question. So let's say we want this to be, because we can give it an asset name, but then we can still have question text and answer text on top. So we can say test question. So our asset that we've just created here is called test question. We're going to say, what is the answer to the test question in Duel? Question mark. So our question text is literally, what is the answer to the test question in Duel? The answer of which is always 42. And just like that, we've created our first question. We have literally just created our first question in the game. Doesn't really do anything because nothing talks to that question type yet, but we now have a question type, which is the test question, and it has some question text and some answer text. And you can just keep creating more questions and more questions and more questions. You just keep creating assets for them. Just like that. Alternatively, if you want to make it more of a question bank, then you can change this type to instead be called a question bank with a different type up here. And then you can create sort of an array of these objects in some regard. I'm just going to leave it like this because it's sort of a simpler concept. But if we have time at the end, then maybe I can introduce a question bank at the end to make it a little easier. So for now, we have a test question, and now we need to add in some sort of display on here to demonstrate how to present the question, how to animate it in and out. I mean, that's another option egg. We can introduce that as well. Let's just create a new question called Joss. I'm going to call it Joss, and it is the Philippines. Something like that. There we go, we've got another question. I may even create a folder for these questions as well. So I'm going to create a folder by going right click, create folder, renamed it to questions, and I'm just going to drag these questions into that folder right now. So now we have 2 questions in there. So let's bring in a new layout into this game for the question. So I'm going to bring in a UI image. This image is going to be, I don't know where we want this on screen really. We don't want it over the podiums because that shows us who's flashing. We don't really want it. I mean, we can have it over the panels at least, because we don't need to worry about the panels while a question is live. So we can have it over here somewhere. So we're going to have it across the entire width of the screen. So we're going to change the anchors to 0 and 1 on the X, so that it goes for the entire width of the screen, and reset the left and right. So these are the offsets away from those anchors, if you remember from the first episode. We're going to have this pinned to 0.5 to point... Ooh, that's too far. To 0.7. So sort of this from the halfway point to up to the 70% line on the y-axis. And again, set those to 0. So this is sort of... this is going to be where our question box is. And hey, you know that box that we used before? Yeah, let's finally use it. Let's finally use that question box that we spent all that time working on. So we're going to use this question box, which looks obviously rather garish, but you can change that box to whatever you want. And remember that we can use a 9 slicing operation so that we can have this persisted border, just like that. Okay. We're going to rename this as a question box. Just call it a question box as well, just to make it a bit more obvious what its purpose is in the hierarchy. And also remember, where it appears in the hierarchy matters. So if it appears above the background, then it actually renders before the background does, and as you can see, it just disappears. So we want this sort of on top of everything, so it means to be at the bottom of the hierarchy, but still needs to be in the game object, because it's a UI element and it needs to be part of the canvas. If it isn't, then things can go wrong. So leave that in there. Inside of the question box, we need some question text. So let's go UI, and we want text Mesh Pro. Again, I'm going to pin this to the entirety of the rectangle. So do the shortcut that I've said before. Click on the middle center anchor presets button, hold Alt and Shift, and then click on stretch and stretch at the bottom right to make it fill the entire parent. Let's change the alignment so that it's sort of centered. And we're going to change the font back to a font we used before. So we're going to use Roboto Medium. And we're going to change the font size to like 72 by default, and maybe even change the color to be black so we can read it on the bright background. And we're also going to use the heavy... No, we're not going to use heavy shadow. We're just going to use the default material for it. This is just some temporary text to test the limits of the question display, such as really long questions that might exceed the bounds of the box. So I'm just using this as sort of placeholder text, so that you can configure the text ahead of time if your questions do end up being long. So you can see with the font size of 72, it's getting a bit too excessive, but we used a trick from before for the names. So let's do another trick now for that, just to make certain this question text fits okay. So to do that, we need to switch the auto sizing on. We need to check what's the minimum and maximum size we want. We don't want the text to be as small as 18, because if we set that, then no one's going to be able to read that. So we need to set the sort of the minimum to like 36, which I think 36 is possibly reasonable for the absolute minimum size. And the other thing we want to change is this, probably this the character width compression value. I tend to go with 50% on this, just so it can squish the characters this way by at most 50% before resizing, which you can see it fits more in as a larger size now, but might not be what you want to do. So maybe you don't want this to be as high as you want. Maybe it just only wants to be like 10% compression in the width of the character. My hack to that was always to type 0 to 9 repeatedly to get an idea of what could fit. That's a good way of doing it. I would also potentially use W. Capital W is generally a very wide character, so I tend to use capital W as a good test. Obviously with some spaces so that it can sort of word break like that. But yeah, big capital W's is a good way of testing width of text, because there's actually not many W's there, but because of the capital W being quite big and quite wide, it's a good test. But I also use really long text sometimes like this just to test the box width. So I've got this configured at minimum 36, maximum 72 with a depth percentage maximum compression of 10. That seems about reasonable for me. I'm also going to just bring it in from the edges because you can see it's sort of bleeding into the border. So to do that, we're just going to change these offsets from the anchors to be a little bit in. So we're just going to move those in by, let's say 10. We're going to say 10 from each edge so that they don't bleed into the border. So now it fits quite nicely into the border like that, nicely fitting in the box. And that's going to be our question text. And we're also going to need a answer text box. So we could create a new box sort of outside of this and make another box alongside, or we can actually have this be a child and then it will sort of follow along with everything. So I'm going to create another box, a UI image, and this time I'm going to parent it to the bottom edge. So instead of making it fit to the entire box, we're actually going to make it fit to the bottom edge. So to do that, I'm going to hold Alt and Shift on this anchor preset, and instead of selecting this option in the bottom right, I'm actually going to move up one, which goes to bottom stretch. So it anchors everything to the bottom edge and stretches it along the x-axis. And that nearly does what we want. It's not quite exactly what we want because it's sort of going into the question. I actually want it to be below the question. To do that, I actually want to change the pivot to 1. And as soon as I do that, it actually fixes it. Now, that might not work for you because of this option here, this R option. It only worked for me because I had R on. So with R off, and I change the pivot, it doesn't actually reposition it. To do that, I would actually just end up changing the position Y back to where it should be on 0. But if you were in raw edit mode, so with the R on, and I change pivot to 1, then it actually fixes it for you automatically. So just beware that if you do have some of these special buttons on, that it might be doing different things to what you're seeing happen on screen right now. So just be careful about that. So this is the source of the values I want. So I have the pivot of the Y on 1, position Y is 0, and then the height is going to be the height of the box. So we're just going to make this be like 140, something like that. And you know what? Maybe I don't want it to be completely up to the edges of the box. Maybe I just want them inset a bit. So I'm going to actually bring them in by 10% on each side. So bring them to 0.1 and 0.9 on the X anchors. Something like that. And I'm going to change it to use the same box, but I'm going to tint it a different color, and going to make it like that. Maybe something like that. Obviously, use a better graphic ahead of time rather than trying to use a yellow graphic and making it, because I'm using a blue reshading here that ends up actually making it green because of the way of these colors having some green component to them. So maybe use a different graphic rather than using the same one over and over again in this case. I'm going to rename this as the answer box, and then inside of the answer box we want some answer text. Now I could just go right click UI TextEdit Pro and configure another one of those, or I can cheat, copy question text, then with answer box selected, paste. Alternatively I could have just duplicated, so with question text selected, hit Control D to duplicate it. I then want to reparent this, so this is part of the answer box. So I'm going to drag from this object onto answer box to make it slightly lighter grey. So that reparents it. And then I'm going to do that cheat, the little hack to make it fit the box. So with the anchor preset selected, go Alt and Shift, and then click bottom right. And that makes it fit the box. And I'm going to shift it away from the edges of the border again by 10. So that's using the same kind of text constraints, and we just want to make this one be white text instead of black text because it's a darker background. So now we have that for our answer text. If I rename that as answer text, something like that. So we now have a very basic display of a question that we can populate and an answer that we can populate with a lot of text in it. Of the answer display. So that's sort of a simple UI for getting a question to display. So now we need to have this get some question data into it. To do that, what we're going to do then is create a new script for this question box, which can then accept some of the question assets, and then we'll be able to sort of give it some data to fill these with. So let's do that. Let's go and add a component to the question box, and we want a new script, so click new script, and we want to call this, I think we want to just call it a question box. We don't want to call it question because we already have that as a thing, because that's the type for the actual data, but we want something to be able to display it. So we're going to have a question box. So call create an add, click that, and that should create us a new script, which it has unhelpfully not opened, but hopefully there should be a script at the root level of assets. I don't know why it likes to create them here, but it's a bit stupid. I'm going to move this into the folder that we want it to be in. So I'm going to drag it from the root assets folder into the scripts folder that we have explicitly created for its purpose. Again, Visual Studio is not opening it. So let's quickly go back again into Unity, go to the scripts and double click question box. And there it is. Finally, we are there. Finally, we are here. So, what does a question box have? Well, we know it has the two text elements. It has those two text elements for displaying the question text and the answer text. So let's add those first. So we have public TMP underscore text, question text, and end the line with a semicolon. You may have noticed it automatically added this line here, the using TM Pro. Remember that this needs to be here to be able to get this name to work correctly here. So if your editor doesn't automatically add it, just make sure you have using TM Pro somewhere at the top here in the using section so that this name here can resolve correctly. We also have TMP underscore text for answer text, like that. I'm going a little faster than I was doing before. I'm hoping that you're starting to twig with some of the stuff I'm doing. So I'm not going to dilly-dally as much now. We're just sort of going to pick up the pace. So we have question text and answer text. The other thing we want to introduce at this point, though, is we need to add in some way to reference the questions. So to do that, we're going to do public question, square bracket open close, questions. Now what this is, again, it's a public, so everything else in the game can access it. Question array. So this is an array of questions. Keeping up so far, aside from the anchors on the boxes earlier, which I'm leaving as a lost cause. We can maybe recover that at some point in a moment. Public question array type, so an array of questions, so a collection of questions, and we're going to call that just simply questions. So we'll be able to specify these in a moment with the set of questions that we have defined earlier. And we want to introduce some way of showing the question or picking a question from the array. So we need to have an index, I guess you can say, into the array that we remember. So this time only the question box needs to know about this. So it's a private. So private means only the script itself needs to know about the value, nothing else does. So I'm going to leave this as a private. An int, because there's an integer for the index. And we're going to name this as question index to remember the index of the question that we're on. We also need to add in some way that the game outside can reveal this question. So we need to have some sort of method in this to say, I want to show a new question. So to do that, we're going to add a new method down here. Public, because other things in the game need to talk to it. Public void. Void meaning we don't need to worry about a return type for the method. And we're going to say show next question. Open and close parentheses. We don't care about any parentheses. And then like that. Now what we need to do for next question is we sort of need to advance the index on, and then we need to populate these two text elements with whatever is at that question index. You may notice that we haven't specified anything for this yet, and we may be advancing the index on. So remember that indices for arrays will start at 0 for the first entry. So, and by default, an int is it starts out life as a 0 if you don't specify anything. That isn't what we really want, because otherwise that will skip over the first question in the code we're about to do. So instead, we want to default this value to -1 for now. It's -1. Seems a bit weird that we're indexing at a number that isn't that is a negative number, but it just makes sense for when we're about to set up the next question, because we're about to increment the index before we do anything. So make sure that line is there set as -1, and then in show next question we first increment the question index. So we're going to go that. So we're going to move question index up by 1. So what that does, remember, is it takes this value, adds 1 to it, and then equates it to the new value. So if this was -1, then this will make it be equal to 0. If it's 0, then it becomes 1, etc, etc. Then we want to change these text elements to display what is in that question at the current question index array. So we do question text dot text is equal to questions at the index of question index, because we're looking at an array, so we're referencing the question at question index, and we need to reference specifically its question text, like that. We also want to populate answer text.text, which is equal to questions at that same index of question index dot answer text. So what this does, it will set the text of this question text element to be equal to the text that we specified earlier in that in the questions in that array. We haven't got any animation or anything configured yet, so it's going to reveal the question and answer at the same time, but it should, in theory, be okay. So this should be enough to at least get it going. We will need to have a button somewhere to reveal the next question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a new button up here, which is sort of in the right place. Ooh, excuse me. So we want to create a new button. This button is going to be called next question. Let's just make certain we've got that. Yeah, next question. I'm going to drag it down a little bit and change the text inside of it to say next question. And because this is a button, we can change this button's click events. So I'm going to remove what it already had, and instead we want to talk to the question box. Now, we haven't actually associated the question box yet. Let's do that first, otherwise we won't be able to reference anything. So go to the question box. We've got this script on it. We need to reference the question text and answer text. So let's quickly drag those in. Question text is that, and answer text is that. So now we have those referenced. And we're also going to reference some questions as well. So by default, it's an array of 0 size, but we can add in some new elements. So let's add in a question. If you click on that, it goes to the assets, and let's add in the task question. And you know what? We'll also add in the JOS question as well. Now heading off. Good luck with the rest of the stream. Going to get dinner before tonight's SDR. Oh god, yeah. SDR is going to be a long one. Catch you later, Crazy Dan. I'll be ending in about an hour's time from now, hopefully. and then yeah, maybe tuning into some of Schlag, and maybe some of Google that. But catch you later. Hope you can catch up with us next time around. So I've just added those 2 questions, test question and JOS, to this question box, and also referenced the text elements. Okay, and then this button, this next question button, I need to change its on click to do something. So let's add an event call to it, and we're going to do something on the question box. So let's drag the question box as the target, go to function. It recognizes the question box script, and then it recognizes there should be show next question. So that will call that method called show next question when you click that button. Let me save the project so that we've remembered all the stuff we've done so far. And if I hit play, now by default it still hasn't really done anything. It still has that text. However, if I now hit next question, it's populated it now with that data that we had in that scriptable object that was in the test question. What is the answer to the test question in Duel? It is 42. And if I hit next question again, it should then move on to the next question in that array. It now populates it with JOS as the question, and the answer being the Philippines. And you're probably thinking, well, we've run out of questions now, so what happens if we hit next question? We get a index out of range exception array at the bottom. If we click on that and find ourselves in the console, it says index was outside the bounds of the array. Now, this completely depends on what you want to do in this scenario, whether you loop the index back around or whether you clamp the index so you don't move on to any new questions. If you just want to have it cycle back around again to the first question, I can quickly show you how to do that. So, show next question does question index plus equals 1. We need to check to see if this is still a valid index or not. So what we're going to do is do if, and open up some parentheses for the condition. If question index is now greater than or equal to, and I'm going to open up Notepad again because it's doing special things to the text. So this should read now as if question index sort of angle bracket close equals, that's technically what that symbol is, but it's sort in this context it's read as a greater than sign, so greater than or equal to, and then we're going to add in a condition of it comparing to questions.length, so that's the array length of questions. Now if you think about how the indexing works, with 0 being the first, 1 being the second, if you have an array of, say, 10, then the last valid index in that array will be 9. So if you're comparing for equal to or greater than length, that should be invalid because the value at the array index of 10 in a length of 10 array would be technically the 11th element if it existed, but it doesn't, so that would be bad. So for 0-based array comparisons, if you want to check to see if your index is too large, you're basically always going to be comparing against the length of that array, because that's always going to be beyond the range of valid indexes. So if question index is greater than or equal to the expected length of the questions array, then what we want to do in our case is just reset it back to 0. Let's just go back all the way to question number 1. Maybe we're doing some sort of perfect recall or something. So all we do is if question index is greater than or equal to the length of the questions array, then reset that back to 0. Now there might be a couple of people out there thinking, ooh, modulo math, why did you do that? Alright, if you want to do some modulo math, I can show you how to do that instead. So instead of doing this and having an if condition, you can do this in one fell swoop with a modulo operation. So you can do question index equals question index plus 1 modulo questions.length, end the line with semicolon. Now this is a little more complicated to read for new people to programming, but let me quickly break it down for you. So what this will do is it will set question index to be equal to the value of question index plus 1, and then it will modulo it, so sort of do a long division and return the remainder of that operation, and do that with the value of questions.length. Do note that there are parentheses here because we are trying to control the order of the operations. If I didn't control the order of operations here, I forget which one has the higher precedence, but I believe the modulo operator has a higher precedence than the plus operator does in this language. So if you're familiar with BODMAS, PEDMAS, BIDMAS, whatever you call it in your location, there are similar orders of operation to worry about in languages. They may not be the same order, and there may also be explicit reorders between pluses and minuses, etc. So do be aware of that and use brackets, i.e. parentheses in this case, to control the order of the operations. Listen, it's there saying modulo does have a higher precedence. So if I had it left it like this, the first thing it would do is 1 modulo the length of the questions, which is always going to be 1 really in our case, unless the length was 0, in which case undefined, probably would throw an exception. Then it would add question index, but with the parentheses in place, it will do this first, question index plus 1, and then do the modulo operation of questions.length. So the sum result of this is it will go 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8, 8 to 9. With the example of we're currently on 9 and we move on to what would technically be 10, but that would be index 11, the 11th element in an array of length 10, for example. Let's do that. So question index is 9 plus 1, so that's 10, modulo, that would be 10 modulo questions.length is also 10. If you do the integer division of 10 divided by 10, that would give you 1 with no remainders. So the result of the modulo operation there is 0. So when you go from 9, it would end up then to 0. So instead of doing these 4 lines of code, you can actually sort of compress that all down into that single line of code and using some modulo maths instead. Whichever makes more sense to you. You can obviously have the if condition if that makes more sense to you at this time, but you can also use modulo here to do all the work for you and do everything in sort of 2 calculations rather than doing a calculation and a comparison and then an assignment after that. As Royal Flush says, modulo is bay. I think that's probably the first thing you taught me from a good coding point of view. Yeah. There are, again, other ways outside of this that are probably even better still, but certainly for a simple array accessing and advancing through, this works quite well. So if we now have that code and we just test that and go into play mode. First question is this one. Next question is this one. Now, before, when we hit next question, it threw the exception of index out of range. But now if you hit it, it goes back to the first one we had. So we're now back to what is the answer to the test question in Duel, 42. And it just keeps going on and keeps cycling through rounds, through those questions, just like that. I think I missed where and how the questions array was actually populated, Clemson. So what I did was, on the question box element, we created this script called question box, this is the code for that. I then associated question text and answer text with the appropriate text elements in the hierarchy. So question text and answer text like that. And then this questions array would have started out life like this. So questions would have started out with size 0. So what I did is made that be size 2. And then for each element, I then clicked and then selected test question as the first one. And then the second one, selected JOS as that one. So that's how I associated them. You can also just drag directly into the asset. So if you have the assets, let's go to game, questions, and have that question box script open again. You can actually just drag directly from here onto the title of the array, and they'll actually append it to the end of the array. So you can do this, drag it onto questions, you can see how the cursor changes symbols there. And you can then drag that in. Yes, you can have the same question in multiple times as well in the array. That is no problem as well. You can just reference the same thing multiple times if need be. In this case, I don't. I just want to reference one each one once. So I'm actually going to remove this element. To do that, right-click on the element label here, and then click Delete Array Element. The first thing it will do is actually nullify the property. And then if you do it a second time, it actually then deletes it. Should have now remember why I love collections versus arrays. Well, like I say, this is doing a lot of very basic things. What I would end up doing is doing lots of random picking and remembering of which ones I've picked and all that, which is far more complicated. But this just works for what we need to do for now. I'm going to hit save and save project where we are. Okay. So we now have it cycling through the questions and all that jazz. Now, we want to introduce some animation states to this presentation. So, what are the different states for a question box? Well, first of all, we have hidden. We then have reveal the question. We then have reveal the answer. And then we have go away. So we actually have 4 different states there. But we actually don't need to do one of them. We don't need to worry about the hidden one because we can use the active flag of the element to control that one. So hidden is just going to be an inactive game object. So we actually only need to deal with 3 at this point. So only 3 states we need to worry about is slide in to reveal the question, reveal the answer, then slide out. Those are the 3 you need to worry about. So we've got, won't you only have 3? Question, no answer. Question with answer. And then no question, no answer. Well, if you want to do the slides of the animations, those will need to be different states. You could, theoretically, what you're talking about, Liswitz, is the actual logical states, where you would only have hidden, question only, question answer. Those are the 3 logical states. However, with animations, you also need to think another level on top of that, how the animations are going to work. So there'll actually be a slide in with just the question displayed state. There will be reveal the answer state. There will be slide out state. And then the 4th theoretical state is hidden, but we don't need to worry about that as an animation. So there's actually 4 states, 3 of them we're going to animate, and the 4th we're going to use the active state as a trick. So let's configure that now. Let's hit save again. So let's do some animations. So to do that, go to the animation window at the bottom that we had before, and we want to create a clip for it. So let's click create. And the first one we're going to introduce is the slide in. Let's go back to the animations folder. And we're going to say this is called question slide in, and hit save. That's going to be our first animation, is question slide in. What we're going to animate for this, we are going to animate its position. So to do that, go into record mode, and I'm actually going to bring in the transform move tool to make this a little easier, because rect position animation is a little finicky if you try and just move the object itself, whereas if you use the transform, it's a lot easier because you're just basically moving a single point and it does all the extra maths for you. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the keyframe of where we already are, and then I'm going to move that around. So I'm going to add in yes, no, maybe, I don't know. Can you repeat the question? We'll mess around with it. So, no, we're going to set. We're going to do it properly. We're going to do it properly. Okay, so slide in. We're going to have it slide in from the right-hand side. So from the right-hand side into the middle of the screen. So let's slide him over to there. And you can see these numbers that have been changed here, 1923, 1923, so that kind of wants to be 1920, 1920. We don't need a size delta, so 1920, 1920. because we had a full desktop size of 1920 by 1080, so it makes sense that would be the number. And then all the way, how long is the animation going to last? Just say it's going to last 40 frames, so that is 2/3 of a second, because the animation is defined as 60 frames long by default. So at frame 40, we're going to bring this guy back into the center of the screen, like that. And we managed to get it dead on 0 there. So if we just preview that animation, it goes flump, 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 flump. Maybe we want it to sort of, instead of do ease in, ease out, maybe we'll just want to just do an ease out. So let's focus on the animation. So it's animating from this X position down to 0. I'm going to change the curve to be a bit more like that, so it goes, so it sort of starts out fast and then slows down to nothing. If we preview that, it goes like that now. It's quite nice. Obviously, you can mess around with the curves however you feel is necessary for you. So slide that in like that. But we don't have you don't want to have the answer revealed yet. So we also, if you go back to Dope Sheet, we also want to record the fact that the answer box is hidden. So with the answer box selected in the hierarchy, click the checkbox for answer box to make it be false. We sort of used this trick earlier with the other option for doing flashing on the podium. So by default, we want the answer box here to be inactive when the question text slides in. So now, in question slide in, it is just the question text that appears, or the question box. Okay, that's our first state. Now let's create a new state, which is question reveal answer. Let's just call it that. Hit save. And by default, it brings back everything that was there, which is okay, I guess, in this case. But what we're going to do is actually, I'm going to fade in this box. Actually, fade in the box. That would be quite nice, because I haven't taught canvas groups yet, which is a nice little thing to add in. So what I'm actually going to do before we mess around with the animation is I'm going to add in a canvas group. Now what that does is it allows you to specify a set of objects that can be grouped together, and with that group you can then actually alpha them in and out. You've hidden the answer box. Does it still animate even though you don't see it? Technically, Liswitz, yes, because answer box is parented to this question box. It will still animate and move with it. You just don't see it, but it will, because all of the positions, rotations, and scales are relative in the hierarchy. It will stay relative to its parent. So yes, it will animate with its parent like that, even if it's hidden away. Yes, canvas groups, that's what we're going to talk about. So to the answer box, I'm going to add a canvas group component like that. So I did add a component and I added canvas group. Don't add a canvas, don't add a canvas renderer, don't add a canvas scaler. You want a canvas group specifically. And it has this alpha field now of 1. Now if you play around with that, you can see now that everything inside of this box, including its children, now alpha in and alpha out. The other way you could do this, obviously, if you didn't want to do a canvas group, you can animate both the box and text color at the same time. That means you're animating 2 properties, whereas you could just animate the 1 property here, which we're going to do with a canvas group. Okay, so now let's reveal the answer. Let's change this. So record mode. Now the first thing we want to do is actually we need to record a keyframe that is the answer box active, because if we play these animations in sequence, it will remember that the last thing we changed was the answer box state being false. But we don't have anything to set it to true yet. So let's add a keyframe in this animation to say that the answer box is active. We only need to do that the once. We only need to set that at keyframe 0. And then let's also set the alpha of the canvas group to fade the answer in. So it starts out at alpha 0, and let's say that fades in during 1 second, like that. So if we then play it back, you can see that it fades in the answer box in a second. That's okay. And now we need one more animation to hide the animation away. So, create a new clip, and we want to do question slide out. Okay, question slide out, and we're going to make that slide over to the left hand side of the screen. So it's got to be similar to the right hand one, but over to the left. So record, and we're going to record the position over from here. So I'm actually going to do this and set this back to 0 to where it was. Don't forget we're in record mode. So anchor position X property of 0, and then I'm moving the wrong object. Let's start again. Let's delete that project. Delete that, not the project, the property. My God, don't delete the project, please. Select question box. That's the one we want to actually animate. Move it a bit and do 0. As you can see here, as I'm moving the question box, it's moving the answer box with it. So start out at anchor position 0. Let's move to frame 40, which is 2/3 of a second through. And let's slide over here, and we'll make it -1920. So it goes like that. And I'm going to change the curve. So go into curves mode. Again, press F to focus on the curves. And I'm going to make it sort of accelerate away. So it starts out with no speed and then accelerates away. So I'm actually going to edit the ending keyframe and bring its tangent up a bit. Like that. So it goes a bit more like that. Yeah, so now sort of accelerates its way. It's actually going back the other way slightly. I think I've taken it too far up. So bring that down a bit. It goes like that. Yeah, that's better. So now slides out, goes like that. And what you can also do as part of the animation, if you go back to Dope Sheet, is at the end of this, at frame 40, we can then add a keyframe that turns itself off. You can actually turn the object off in a keyframe. So at frame 40, we're going to set question box to be false. Or at least you could do that in the old days. Now you can't. Okay, ignore me. You can't do that anymore. You could do that in the old days. They must have changed it. Can you do it as an animation event? Can you do it as an animation event? Let's quickly have a look. Do is active, but that's not setting anything though, is it? Because that was the trick I was going to do, was just you then change the active flag by the animation, because you could do that before. So maybe we'll have to introduce a fourth state anyway. I'm sure I used to be able to do this before, but now you can't. Unity, why you do this? Is enabled isn't the same though. Is enabled is different to the game object. That's the thing. That is let me just quickly go through that. So, is enabled for the I mean, it's already off screen, so actually you don't need to worry about it. Oh yeah, you don't need to worry about it. Ignore me. We don't need to worry about it being off. That's fine. Duh, I'm stupid. We just need to... Yeah, we don't need to worry about it. It's off screen, so we don't need to worry about it. So, ignore me. But yeah, is enabled is different to is active. They're different things. But we do need to have... a state that is just hidden by default. So, we will need to introduce one. So I'm going to call it question hidden. And what this will be is just off screen. We're just going to literally set this to be off screen. So make that 1920. So that's actually hidden. So we are going to introduce a fourth animation state just to make life easier. And by default, it will have the hidden state when we go and edit the animator state machine. So by default, it will start out hidden. We then can do a transition which is hidden to slide in, transition from slide in to reveal answer, a transition from reveal answer to slide out, and then we can then start from there. So question hidden, we're just going to set a single keyframe there. In fact, we don't even need to define any more keyframes. That should be just enough. Now, If I leave it as is, all those other animations here, these ones like reveal answer, slide in, slide out, will default to being a looping animation, which is not really what we want in these cases, because these are sort of like fire and forget. You just want it to animate the once and then stop until we do something else. So we need to change that property on those animations. So let's go to those animations in the assets. So assets underscore game animations. And we go to question slide in, and we want to turn loop time off, so it does not loop the animation. Also want to do the same to slide out, and also the same to reveal answer. Now hidden can be or can't be. It's either way, it'll work the same way because it is just a single keyframe. So that could loop or just not loop. I'm going to leave it as looping because it sort of makes sense that it does. Okay, so that is how all that works. Thank you for the host there, tips. Greatly appreciated. Hope you're doing well. So what we need to do is go to the animator. So I already had this tab open from earlier, but if you don't, then you can either find it in Window, Animation Animator, or you can go to select the object you're sort of controlling the animations of, so question box in this case, find the animated component, then double click the controller, and that gets you to the same place. So because of the way we actually added these animations to this object, it defaults slide in to be as the first animation in the state machine, which is not what we want. We want to change that. So right click on entry and click on set state machine default state, and we want to change it to be question hidden as the default state. And you can move these around if that makes it easier for you to organize things, which I'm going to do in a moment, because these are sort of going to end up in a sort of cycle of 3. Hidden is sort of a special one for the start, but then once it's done that, then we don't need to worry about it. So it starts out hidden, and then we need to go from hidden to slide in. So let's do that. We create a transition by right clicking on a state, go to make transition, and then hello, and then left click on the state we want to transition to, like that. From slide in, we want to then reveal the answer, so I'm going to do this, right click on slide in, make transition, go to reveal answer. And then from reveal answer, we then want to go to slide out. So right click on reveal answer, make transition, go to slide out. I'm just going to move some of these out of the way so that they don't get in the way. I'm going to move that there, in fact. Move that there. The position of these literally makes no difference. These are just for your benefit to make it easier to read what's going on. And then slide out, we'll actually then transition to slide in when we have a new question we want to see. So that is sort of the state tree we would like to see happen. So it starts out hidden. When we reveal the first question, it goes to slide in. Then when we reveal the answer, it goes to reveal answer. Then when we hide a question, it goes back to slide out. And then when we reveal the next question, it goes back to slide in. So we can do this a couple of ways to control the state. We can either have this sort of be like an integer for the different states, and we just sort of increment those over time. So we go slide in is sort of state 0, reveal answer is state 1, slide out state 2, and then we go back to 0 again. Or we can do this as 2 parameters. We can have it as reveal question and then reveal answer as 2 different parameters. I'm going to do it as 2 parameters just to make it a little more obvious what it does, rather than sort of trusting that the numbers work. But we will need to be careful about one of the parameters when we come to it. So let's bring 2 parameters in. First is a bool, which we're going to say as reveal question, and the other one we're going to have as reveal answer. So we have 2 parameters. Both of them are Boolean parameters, and they're called reveal question and reveal answer respectively. Now we need to start talking transitions and start tweaking these values. So first of all, let's open up the settings again. They don't have an exit time, as we talked about before. Exit time is if we want a very specific time in the animation we want it to happen. If we don't, then we can turn that off. Transition duration, there is no duration for that. We just want to just start the next animation, so set that to 0. But we do have a condition. So from hidden to sliding in the question, the condition is whether reveal question is specified. So if we do that, then we set that to true, then it should do that transition. Next, to go from slide in to reveal answer. Again, we don't want an exit time, we just want it to happen whenever it happens. Again, no transition, we don't want it to blend, we just want it to start the next animation. And then the next condition is reveal answer being true. Okay. Next, go from question reveal answer to slide out. We want to change the conditions of that. So again, no exit time, no transition duration, but we do want it to be reveal question being false. And I think we'll also change it so that you must also have reveal answer be false as well, just so that we're resetting everything back to the way it should be before we move on to the next question. If I didn't do this, and then we have this next condition of reveal question being true, if we didn't set reveal answer to be false, then it will go reveal question, reveal answer straight after. It will just jump straight to reveal answer, which is not what we wanted to do. So we're having an extra condition on this transition that we set both reveal question and reveal answer to be false so that we are okay to hide it away. Then finally, going from slide out, which at the end of that would basically be hidden, back to slide in, we then, again, no exit time, no transition duration, we add the condition of reveal question is true. So let's just go over those 4 transitions again. So starting by default in question hidden, if reveal question is true, then we transition to slide in and do that animation. Then if reveal answer is true, then we go from slide in to reveal answer. If then after that reveal question and reveal answer are both false, then we will start the slide out animation and transition to that. And then finally, once we've done the slide out, if we're ready to do slide in, then reveal question is true. If that is set to true, then do that transition. I'm going to hit save, and we are nearly there. I mean, we could probably test this out now. We don't have any code for it yet, but let's quickly test it out. So let's go into play mode, and I'm going to drag the animator out like this so you can see what's happening. I need to put it about here because it's going to appear a bit about here-ish. So let's reveal the question by hitting reveal question. That does well. That brings in the question box nicely. Okay, now we want to reveal the answer. To do that, and that fades that in quite nicely. And then to hide the question, we need to turn both of these off, and it slides away. And then to reveal the next question, we click that and brings the next question up, reveal the answer, and turn them both off. Now, as you can see with our tree, we're kind of enforcing the order of the operations that we do. Note that we can't just immediately go reveal question and then hide the question away. We don't have an animation for that. But if we did, you know, if you want to author a special animation that would put the question back away, then you could do that. You can do, in fact, you know what? Let us do that. Let's put in a case for that, just in case we needed to do that. So let's go back to question box. Let's do a you know what? We don't even need to create a new clip because we can actually put a clip in reverse order. We can play a clip backwards. So let's do that. Let's go back to the animator window, back here again. So if we want to hide the question away but not reveal the answer for whatever reason, then let's create a new state. So let's create a state empty. Creates this new state thing, and I'm going to call this question reverse slide in, because that's what it is. It's going to be playing the slide in animation in reverse. And what we're going to do then is change its motion, which is the animation clip, and we're going to specify to use the slide in animation, but we want to do it in reverse. So to do that, we change the speed parameter to be -1. If you do that, it plays the animation, that whole animation, but does it in the reverse order. So basically, it will play exactly what this animation is, but backwards. Absolutely tips to -1. So now we need to add in some extra transitions to handle this case of if we specify to hide the question but not reveal the answer yet. So let's add some more transitions. We need to transition to and from it like that. So transition from question slide in to reverse slide in. Again, no exit time specified, no transition specified, no transition duration specified, but the condition for that is reveal question is false. Then likewise, from reverse slide in back to slide in, no exit time that we need to worry about. Again, we don't want to blend, so no transition duration. And we specify that reveal question is true. So these new transitions we've added in this new state, we're going from slide in to reverse slide in if reveal question is now false. And then from reverse slide in back to slide in if reveal question is true. If we hit save, and let's go back in and bring the animator window back out again so you can see what's going on alongside things, like that. Let's do reveal question. Let's do the regular flow again. So reveal question, then reveal answer. That worked quite nicely. Then turn both of them off, it slides back out. So let's reveal the question, but now we don't want that question back up, but we don't want to reveal the answer. So let's unreveal the question. It goes back the other way, and it's hidden off screen. Now we want to bring the question back on again. There we go. And then reveal answer. There you go. So now you have the different ways of revealing and hiding the question and answer. And we even added an extra state there without even adding a new animation. We just used the same animation from before, but in reverse. It's quite nice. But now we need some programmatic control. So we've got the next question button. We're going to need probably 2 more buttons. We're going to add 2 more buttons just to make it really explicit what each button does. You could, in theory, have one button do all the jobs, and they do them in succession, but maybe you want to do them in a different... we want a next question button, we want a reveal answer button, and then we want a hide button. So we're going to have 3 different buttons for that. So, next question, dupe, dupe. We can dupe that 2 more times. So next question, reveal answer, and hide question. Those are going to be our new buttons. And you know what? We're going to use the side on the left because there's definitely space to use that over there. So let me move these over. So I'm going to have next question, reveal, and hide question all over on this side of the grid. I'm going to move it. Go back up here and move them up like that. Reveal. Next question. Reveal answer. Should be. Oh shoot! I'm moving the wrong thing. Reveal answer. Move it to about there, and then hide question. Move it to about there. Obviously, I'm just sort of roughly placing these. You can have a bit more finesse to them. Change the text of this one to say reveal answer. Change the text of the last one to say hide question. So now we have 3 different buttons for the different jobs, and we need to introduce some properties to the question box, a bit like we did with the podium. So if you remember back to the podium, we introduced this property here called flashing, and that controlled the animator parameter called flashing. We're going to do the same kind of thing with the question box for those 2 different things, the reveal question and reveal answer properties. So let's go back to the question box script. We're going to add in a public animator field to store the animator that we're going to be using to animate stuff with. This doesn't have to be particularly here. It could have been below the question text. It's just I group sort of all of the references to things inside the scene in one place, and then references to data and other things in another place. It's just a habit I get into, I guess. Then we also need to add in two properties, more Boolean properties. So public bool reveal question. And we do this again as a property of a getter and a setter. We're also going to get a template ready for the answer one as well. So public bool reveal answer get set. I'm going fast again with the text. I appreciate that. I'm just going to give you a little moment to catch up with that. So we have this sort of code template going on. And it's going to look very similar to this, just with different names in it. Let's put it that way. So in the getter for reveal question, we're going to go return animator.getBool reveal question as the name and end the line with semicolon. So the getter for reveal question property is going to return whatever the Boolean value for reveal question is. That's the parameter name in the animator. And then let's do the setter for it. So animator.setBool open parentheses for the parameters of this method call. The parameter name is reveal question, and the value is the value keyword from the setter. So this is going to be the Boolean value that we want to set. And then let's do basically the same with reveal answer, but the name of the parameter is now reveal answer. So animator.getBool reveal answer, and animator.setBool reveal answer value, end the line with semicolon. So now you should have code that looks a bit like that. We've added this, oopsie daisy. We added this up here for a reference for the animator. We then added these two properties here, public properties, so that other things in the game can access them, and they're called reveal question and reveal answer. And then they respectively return whatever the Boolean value is of that parameter, and you can also set the appropriate Boolean value of that parameter. That all makes sense? I hope it does. Because now that we've made them as properties, they should be very easy to set by button presses, because button presses work with properties. So now we go to the button. Next question currently calls the show next question method, which populates the text, which is fine. We also now want it to do the animation on the question box. So let's add another event call. Again, the target is question box, and this time we will do question box, and we want to change the reveal question property. We want to change that to be true. So when we hit this button, it will change this property to true. Then we go to reveal answer. We don't need it to have the show next question method, so event call. So we'll remove that one first. Add in a new one. Again, question box is the target, and we want to call this question box, and we want to change the reveal answer property, and we want to set that to true. And then for hide question, remember we had to set both of them to be false for the animation to trigger. So again, remove this property that we don't need, this event call that we don't need. And then we need to add two event calls now, both of them targeted to question box. And then we go for the first one, set question box, reveal question to be false. So make certain that's unticked to be false. And the other one, question box, reveal answer, also false. Make certain it is unticked. Hit save. Hit save project. And in theory, because we've set the question box default state in the animator to be question hidden, when we go into play mode, it should just disappear off screen. And then when we hit the next question button, it will populate the text of the question text and answer text elements with the correct text of the next question coming up. And then it should also slide it in. And then when we go to reveal the answer, it then should reveal the answer box by fading it in. And then when we hit the hide question, it then should slide it all away and then basically reset everything ready for the next question to come up. So let's see what happens if we hit play. Okay, they've disappeared. Now if we hit next question button, it goes unassigned reference exception. The variable animator has not been assigned. We forgot a step. So let's go back out of play mode, back into edit mode. We forgot one step. And that step was on the question box. This animator field has not been assigned. So let's quickly assign that by going to the animator and dragging that into this field to assign it. Hit save project, and go to play. And then now if we hit next question, there it is. It slides in and it's populated with the next question already. What is the answer to the test question in Duel? If you then hit reveal answer, it reveals it with 42. And then to hide the question away, we just go hide question, just like that. Cool. And if we hit next question again, it slides in with the new question of Joss. Hit reveal answer, Philippines, and then hide the question away. And you can do multiple actions. You do different actions in different orders. So if we go next question, specify that. So we've cycled back because we only have the 2 questions. We've cycled back to that question. But let's say I don't want to reveal the answer. Let's just hide that question away. Click hide question. It goes away. Then if you hit next question, it then should advance to the next question along, which it does, and reveals that one instead. And reveal answer, reveals that answer, and you can hit hide question. Now there is one other case we have not really dealt with here. What if I was to hit next question twice in a row without hitting one of the other buttons first? So if I click that, and then hit next question again. Now we're already in that animation, and we're not changing the parameters, so it's not going to change the animation state, but it's just changed the text and moved it on. That may or may not be what you want to have happen. That's entirely your decision. Now, if you want to restrict it so that you cannot do that, you can change the interactable state of the button so that you can control whether the button can be pressed or not. So let's mess around with those. So you're basically forcing the buttons to work in a certain way. Let's change reveal answer and hide question, because we can't really reveal an answer and hide question if the question is not even visible yet. So let's set those to be interactable false to start with. That means we cannot interact with the button. They are just there. They don't do anything. Okay. You know what? I'm going to bring in on these 3 buttons. I'm also going to change their transition back to color tint so we can see more about what it's doing. We took those off earlier because we were changing the colors on this side to the different colors for attack, chance, and pony reset. On these buttons, we don't need to worry about those. So we're going to bring the transitions back so that we can see more about what's actually happening to the buttons. Because now that we've changed these to interactable false, you can see that it's gone to the disabled color that's defined here. So put it back to interactable, goes back to full white, take it back to interactable off by default, then it goes to sort of faded out and slightly grey. Okay. So what we can do now is, on clicking the next question button, we can add a new event that goes, all right, we've hit the next question button. Now I want to disable this button so I can't press it again. So go add to the list, add a new event. We're going to add next question as the target to that button. Go to the function for button and change the bool interactable. And we're going to change that to false. So when we hit this button, it will go through these events and go show next question, reveal question, and then disable the button so you can't click it again. Then we also want to turn these buttons on so that we can actually press them. Could you look at the state of the animation state machine to determine which buttons ought to be active? You can do that. You would probably look at those 2 parameters. That's probably the best way to do it, because otherwise you may be comparing against a lot of different states. But yes, you can do it that way if you want, M. Clemson. So you could have somewhere in the game reference the different buttons here, and then in the update of the game you can go, if question box reveal question is set, then you can say that the next question button is disabled. I'm just doing this in an easier way that doesn't require any additional code, But yeah, you could very much do a lookup instead and sort of poll for the state, because when we made these properties, we added these getters, so we can get at these values at any point in anywhere in the code. So we can check to see if the question box should be revealing the question, whether the question box should be revealing the answer right now. So we can look those up afterwards if we want to. But I'm going to do this a different way. I'm going to do this in a sort of event-based way rather than a poll and lookup way. So, next question, take this button and disable it, but we also want to enable the other two buttons. So we're going to add two more events. We're going to go reveal answer and hide question as the targets. And on these ones, we're going to go button interactable true, and the same one, button interactable true. So, 5 events that this one button will fire. First of all, it shows the next question, then it reveals it with the animation, disables this button, but enables these other 2 buttons. That's one way. Then, what we want to do with reveal answer is, well, we revealed the answer already, we don't need to be able to reveal it again. So let's add another event called to reveal answer to disable itself. So we can go reveal answer, target itself, button, interactable, false. So it disables the button if you hit the reveal answer button. Then on hide question, we want to reveal question, reveal answer off, that's fine. But we will then want to disable this button, disable the reveal answer button if that was active at any point, but then bring the next question button to be back active. So we need 3 more events. We're going to disable the hide question button. So button interactable false for hide question. We don't want to do the same for the reveal answer button. Button interactable false. But the next question button, we do want to have active. So button interactable true. Now if we hit save and save project, in theory, these events in the right order should control the flow of these buttons so that you shouldn't be able to do the wrong thing, if that makes sense. Or at least a thing that we haven't defined yet. That's a better way of putting it. So, we have reveal answer and hide question buttons that we can't click. They're currently disabled. So the only thing we can do at this point is next question. We click that, and it reveals the next question. It now disables the next question button, so we cannot reveal the next question straight off the bat like that. We can decide to reveal the answer, and we can decide to hide the question. Let's say I want to hide the question, I don't want to see it anymore. So hide the question, and that disables this button, also disables the reveal answer button, and brings the next question button back into play. So let's reveal the next question again. This time I actually want to reveal the answer, so let's click reveal answer. That disables itself because you can't reveal the answer multiple times. And now the only thing we have left to do at this point is to hide the question. And we can click that, it hides it away, and then gives us the option to reveal the next question. So that's another way there you can use some interactable toggling to control the flow of the inputs that you can put into the game. So you can't press the wrong button at any point, let's put it that way. So that's a simple way of getting a question and answer to display on screen, cycling through the questions and having you do different animations in and out like that. Anyone have any questions? I think I'm going to be wrapping it up anyway now, so this is all sort of like any final thoughts, any final questions you have before I wrap everything up. Well, thank you very much for sticking through it at the very least. And I hope it all makes sense. I hope this is all very helpful. Thoughts? Kitty. She's disappeared somewhere. I know she'll be wanting some food shortly. So will I. I want some food as well. Does that make sense to everyone? So the sort of the flow of the game is next question, box buzzes in, You then reveal the answer as that, hide the question away, and then you can do some control of the game like that. Something like that. It's a nice flow to it, I feel. Reveal answer. It's wrong. Cool. I think that kind of works. It's a bit kind of on the nose, a bit kind of messy maybe, but it does the job. It does the job. Yep, cool. There we go. Anyone got anything? Or am I wrapping up? I think I'm wrapping up from the looks of things. Well, thank you very much for sticking with it. Hope it's been useful. If you've got any more things you want to know about this, anything you want to catch up on, any other queries, then do let me know on the Unity Workshop channel on my Discord. Next week, we'll probably look more into the scriptable objects and maybe make it do a question stack rather than just individual questions. That way then you can just have the one asset file with multiple questions in, and when you play a single game you just go drag that question stack in. Maybe even do that as a separate asset, so you could do that as a text asset and then load it in. Don't know. What are people's wants? I think QuizDan said he wanted possibly a timer, which would be a good thing to try and do. So maybe we can have a timer implemented somewhere, because that's a fairly simple thing to do. Certainly with code anyway. There are some caveats you have to watch out for. So timer is probably a big thing to do next time round. I will look to do that. And then, yeah, more on question stacks. Thanks once again, and woo, I kept it to the end. Hey, that's good to hear. People keeping up throughout. You're gaining pace. You're gaining pace now. So yeah, timers is probably the big thing next time round. And yeah, any other things that you feel might be useful for a sort of quiz presentation system, let me know in Unity Workshop any ideas you have, and I'll concoct something for next week's tutorial. Presuming I do a tutorial next week. I think I will. Depends on how Duel works. But with that, I think I'm going to leave it. The last thing could be variable difficulty pulling, but oh yeah, no, Squawker. I'm not even going to get into question categorization or anything like that. That's outside the scope of this project. That's definitely outside the scope of this project. Key codes, but it's mostly coding all the things you put on the buttons. We did very quickly look at key pressing at the end of episode 1, but that was a very brief look. We can definitely look into doing more keyboard shortcut stuff, and then yeah, how to do all of this stuff but in scripting instead if you're doing it with keyboard presses, because you don't get the luxury of this in keyboard presses. But I might have a script that helps you out, let's put it that way, because I have that problem all the time, and I've got a script that should fix that and basically do this but somewhere else. So look forward to that. And I'll see you hopefully next week. If I do it next week, I think I will. But I'll see you then. Have a good evening, afternoon, morning, night, whatever time it is currently for you. Enjoy Schlagden, whatever it is, in a moment, because that's going to be starting soon. Enjoy Google That if you're playing and watching along Google That with Ben. Enjoy Chase VGM if you're watching that late this evening. And just generally enjoy the weekend. Enjoy Labor Day as well for those in the States that are sort of... Is celebrating Labor Day the right thing to say? Certainly respecting Labor Day, let's put it that way. Enjoy the weekend, the Labor Day weekend. And yeah, I'll catch you later. Bye.